Hello and welcome to CSTW's Writers Talk. Today I am phenomenally lucky to have one of the best-selling authors of all time and a personal favorite of my children, the writer R.L. Stine, in the studio, in the Humanities College studio at The Ohio State University. So welcome, Mr. Stine.
Thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. And we're going to talk about some of your books and talk about writing and all the things that interest you today and go from there. And we can start off by saying that Mr. Stine was a student here at The Ohio State University just a few years ago and has all kinds
Wait, a few years ago?
A few years ago.
That's so kind of you to say that. A few years ago.
2 or 3. And,
yes, right.
And so we can, when you were the editor of the Sundial
I was the editor of the Humor magazine, and that's about all I did in college. I put out that magazine. I loved it. It was like I never went to class. I just put out the magazine. It was great.
But you did graduate.
I graduated, and the magazine actually paid my way to New York.
That's excellent.
Afterwards, because the editor, through some munificent program, the editor got 22% of the profits.
Oh, okay.
And I made enough money, it paid my way to New York, and I've been in New York ever since.
Okay. Well, that was our loss. You know, if you'd stayed here, we could have had all of the fame of having you as a writer living here. So, darn Sundial.
Yeah.
But that job, I think, led you to some of your earlier jobs writing humor magazines. And so tell me about what that was like.
Well, I wrote for all kinds of magazines. I went to New York and I loved magazines. I wanted to be a magazine writer. My very first job was making up interviews for fan magazines. And I worked for this woman who had 6 movie and TV magazines, and she had to fill them up. And I would come into work in the morning, and she would say, do an interview with Diana Ross. Do an interview with the Rolling Stones. And I would sit down and make up interviews, just totally make them up. And that was my job. And they would run in these magazines.
How is it you never got sued for this?
No one ever sued in those days. These stars wanted to be written about. They just wanted to be in the magazines. That's all they cared about. And so it was a pretty amazing job. I mean, it was a very creative job, for one thing. I had to make up everything. And I learned to write really fast, because I had to write maybe 3 or 4 interviews a day.
Okay. So how did you put yourself into the mindset of being Diana Ross? Were there certain tricks? Did you listen to her music or just say this is a guess?
Yeah, I know. I'd have to find some clippings. I had to base it on something, or base it on some other interview that she had done. We did a lot of stealing, that kind of thing. So that job didn't last very long, but it was kind of fun. And then I went to Scholastic publishers in New York and started writing for educational magazines. And that was my first writing for children. I'd never, you know how things happen in your career, things that you don't really plan.
Oh, yes.
They just happen to you, and that's what happened. I never really planned to write for kids, but I started writing history articles, geography for Junior Scholastic, and then I had my own social studies magazine for kids who didn't read well. And I learned a lot about writing to grade level and that kind of thing. And then Scholastic gave me my own humor magazine, which was my life's ambition, to have my own national humor magazine. And I did a magazine called Bananas, a very crazy Mad Magazine type of thing in full color. And I did that for 10 years. And I thought, man, this is it. I've done what I always wanted to do. I was so lucky. Then they fired me.
Is that I don't recall seeing that magazine. It must have gone.
It was sold through the Scholastic book clubs.
Okay.
It was sold, in schools.
Okay. I maybe I kind of remember that now because I remember the Scholastic book order form coming around, and my daughters and son still bring it home to fleece me of whatever loose change that I might have.
They sell a lot of books right in the schools.
Right.
Book clubs.
And you've talked before about discovering an old typewriter when you were 9 years old, and starting from there, you were writing at that age jokes and
funny magazines.
Stories.
I did little funny magazines, Tales to Drive You Insane, and Tales to Drive You Batty, and they have Whammy. I still have some of them. They're embarrassing. They're horrible. But I would type these things up and staple them and do all the drawing and do these, and then I would bring them into class and pass them around. It was a way of getting attention, I think, from other kids. Teachers hated it.
There's a series of books now, I don't know if you're familiar with them, called, we're going to take this out and I'm going to look smart because I can remember it quickly off the top of my head. Harold Hutchins and George Beard there's a series of books now called The Adventures of Captain Underpants.
Oh, yeah, Dave Pilkey.
Yeah, they do exactly the
Dave
same sort of
Pilkey.
thing. They're taking you were a
He was
free
drawing,
runner.
yes, but he has talent. He could draw. I couldn't draw. I always wanted to be a cartoonist. That's all I ever wanted to do. And then I would bring my comic strips in, and I'd look at everyone else in class. They could all draw better than me. I was horrible. And so that's why I knew I had to be a writer. But yeah, Captain Underpants, kids love those books. They're very funny.
If it makes you feel any better, when I was a kid, for the valedictorian in my class, he graduated as the valedictorian, and when we were in 6th grade, I looked at a picture he had drawn, and he had drawn this scene of a wharf and everything, and there was a drawing of a knothole that was so detailed. That was when I gave up illustrating because I knew I could never do anything like
never
that.
do
And
a
that was
knothole
that was
like
it.
that.
Yeah, now I draw stick figures, and that's the best. But so you've said that you've got the best job making kids laugh and giving them the creeps. What is it about the scaring business that attracts you, or what has it attracted you at a young
Well,
age?
I actually wrote for about 20 years before I discovered the scary stuff. I was funny for a long time, and I did okay. I wrote, about 100 joke books for kids, and my very first book was called How to Be Funny. It was how to be funny at the dinner table and how to get big. Parents hated it.
That sounds very subversive.
Yeah, parents hated it. They hated it. And, I was doing okay. And then I wrote, actually, it's embarrassing, but it wasn't my idea. I was having lunch with an editor, and she said, I'll bet you could. I was home at this time writing all kinds of books. I was writing G.I. Joe books, and I was writing Mighty Mouse coloring book. Anything people would call. I was just home. There's always a point in your career where you don't say no to anything, where anyone calls. Sure, I can. No problem.
I'm in that
I'll do
point
that.
right now. I understand that. Yeah.
And I did Indiana Jones, Find Your Fate books, and Choose Your Own Adventure books, and all this stuff. And this editor, I was having lunch with her, and she said, I'll bet you could write a good, scary teen novel. Go home and write a book called Blind Date. It wasn't even my idea, and she gave me the title. It's kind of embarrassing.
Was that all? The more fleshed out the idea was
No,
just
that
a
was it.
title, Blind
Write
Date.
a book called Blind Date. And I said, sure, no problem, you got it. And I didn't really know what she was talking about. What did she mean, a scary teen novel? So I went right to the bookstore, and I bought all these books by other people who were writing scary teen novels. There were a whole bunch of them. And I read them all, and I, tried to figure out what I could do that was different. How I could write a scary teen novel that wasn't like the ones that were already out. And I decided that I would make them younger and cleaner and not as nasty. And I wrote this book called Blind Date, and it was an immediate #1 bestseller, which I'd never had in all my years of writing. And I thought, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then a year later, they asked for another one. And I wrote another teen novel called Twisted. And it was another #1 book. And I thought, I've struck a chord. I didn't really understand it, but I've struck a chord here. I found something kids really like. And I used to go to schools in the beginning, and I would say to kids, why do you like these books? I didn't get it. Why do you like these books? And every single time they would say, I like to be scared. And I just sort of stumbled onto it, and I've been scary ever since.